At my parents' funeral, my husband announced he was divorcing me. "You're broke now. Your parents left you nothing, they went bankrupt." My daughter agreed and looked at me with contempt. "Mom should just give up." They thought I had lost everything. They thought I would collapse. But the next morning, just one phone call from the lawyer caused their entire perfect plan to start falling apart. "Thank you for staying with me. It means more than you know. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I read every single one." A quick note, some details in this story have been dramatized for storytelling purposes. Any similarities to real people or events are unintentional, but the message I'm sharing is intended to be powerful and thought-provoking. The rain fell in sheets that November afternoon, drumming against black umbrellas at Westchester Cemetery. I stood there 57 years old, watching the priest's lips move without hearing a word. Eleanor and Jonathan Wheeler, my parents, gone in an instant on a rain-slicked Vermont highway. I was still trying to process it when Richard's hand touched my shoulder, my husband of 32 years. I turned expecting comfort. Instead, he handed me papers. "What is this?" "Divorce papers, Elizabeth." His voice was cold, businesslike. "I'm filing today." The words didn't make sense. Not here. Not with my parents lying in caskets just feet away. "Richard, this isn't, we can talk later." "There's nothing to talk about. The truth is, you're broke now. Your parents left nothing. They were bankrupt. And at 57, you're past your prime. I need to think about my future." The world tilted. Several mourners stopped their conversations, staring. My cousin Helen's mouth hung open. The priest went silent. Then Sarah stepped forward. My daughter, my only child. She moved to stand beside her father, something cold in her eyes. "Dad's right, Mom." Her voice was steady, rehearsed. "You're too old for this. The company, the stress-maintaining appearances. Time you stepped aside and let people who actually know what they're doing take over." Rain soaked through my black dress. I couldn't feel it, just spreading numbness radiating from my chest. "Sarah, your grandparents, they're right there. I know where they are." She glanced at the caskets with impatience, not grief. "And I know their financial situation. You're going to be a burden now. Dad and I discussed it. This is for the best." I wanted to scream, to demand how my own daughter could say this over her grandparents' graves. But I just stood there as Richard turned and walked away, Sarah following without looking back. By the time the gravediggers approached, I was alone. Even the priest had left. That evening, I returned to our penthouse on the Upper East Side. The doorman looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Matthews, I'm so sorry. Mr. Matthews left instructions. The locks have been changed." He wouldn't meet my eyes. "He left this for you." A single black suitcase. Inside, one change of clothes and the framed photo from my nightstand, my parents from their 40th anniversary. I checked into a Holiday Inn in Midtown. The room smelled like industrial cleaner and disappointment. I sat on the bed still in my funeral clothes, holding that photograph and trying to understand. My parents were gone. My husband had abandoned me at their graveside. My daughter had betrayed me in front of everyone, and I was penniless. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Matthews, this is attorney Janet Rivera. I represent your parents' estate. We need to meet urgently. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. at my office. There are matters you need to know immediately." I stared at the message. Estate, Richard said they were bankrupt. Maybe there were debts. More bad news. With shaking fingers, I texted back, "I'll be there." I set the phone down and looked at my reflection in the dark window. A 57-year-old woman with running mascara-soaked hair and nothing left. What I didn't know, what neither Richard nor Sarah could have known, was that my parents had been preparing for this. And tomorrow morning, everything I thought I understood about my life was about to change. The lawyer's message glowed on my screen like a lifeline I was afraid to grab. But I had no choice. I had nowhere else to go, nothing else to hold on to except that one mysterious summons. 10 a.m. couldn't come fast enough. The office building in Midtown Manhattan gleamed with old money and older secrets. I stepped out of the elevator onto the 15th floor, my cheap hotel clothes wrinkled and out of place among the mahogany panels and brass fixtures. The nameplate read Rivera and Associates Estate Planning. A receptionist led me into a corner office where floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city skyline. Behind a massive desk sat a woman in her early 50s, sharp-eyed and professional in a navy suit. "Mrs. Matthews, I'm Janet Rivera." She stood extending her hand. "I've been your parents' attorney for 15 years. Please sit down. I know yesterday was... I'm deeply sorry for your loss." I sank into the leather chair across from her. "Thank you. Your message said this was urgent." "It is." Janet pulled a thick folder from her desk. "Before we begin, I need you to understand something. What I'm about to tell you contradicts everything your husband has likely told you." My stomach tightened. "Richard said my parents were bankrupt." "That's a lie." Janet opened the folder, turning it so I could see the documents. "Your parents left you $15 million in liquid assets, cash and securities." The room tilted. I gripped the armrests. "I'm sorry, what? $15 million. Additionally, Wheeler and Company is currently valued at $25 million. Your father built one of the most successful interior design firms in the Northeast." She slid a financial statement toward me. "You are the sole heir. Everything goes to you." I stared at the numbers, unable to process them. "But Richard said he was so certain. Your husband has been lying to you for years, Mrs. Matthews." Janet's voice was gentle but firm. "And we know why." She pulled out more papers, bank statements, dates, transactions. "Over the past 5 years, Richard has systematically embezzled $2 million from Wheeler and Company. He diverted funds through shell accounts, false vendor payments, and inflated expense reports." My hands shook as I looked at the evidence. Richard's signature on dozens of documents, transfers to accounts I'd never heard of. "Your daughter knew about it." I looked up sharply. "What?" "Sarah discovered the embezzlement 18 months ago. Rather than telling you or your parents, she helped him cover it up. We have emails between them discussing how to hide the transactions." Janet's expression was sympathetic. "I'm sorry, I know this is a lot." I couldn't breathe. My own daughter. My own child had helped Richard steal from my family. Why didn't my parents tell me? "They only found out 6 months ago. They hired a forensic accountant who uncovered the pattern." Janet leaned forward. "Mrs. Matthews, your parents were frightened. They suspected Richard was planning something bigger. That's why they restructured everything." She showed me the trust documents, dense legal language that boiled down to one thing, an ironclad fortress around every asset. "This trust is unbreakable. Spousal claims are explicitly excluded. Richard has absolutely no legal right to any of this money or the company. Everything is protected for you alone." "But why didn't they just tell me why the secrecy?" "Because they were afraid." Janet's voice dropped. "They thought if Richard knew they'd discovered his theft, he might do something desperate. So they made these arrangements quietly. The emergency, while reading the immediate transfer, they set it up so that if anything happened to them, you'd know the truth right away." The word anything hung in the air. I thought about the rainy highway, the sudden loss of control. The accident, that's the other thing I needed to discuss. Janet closed the financial folder and opened another one. 3 months before your parents passed, they hired a private investigator, a man named Marcus Stone, former FBI, very thorough. She pulled out a photograph, a gray-haired man with serious eyes. They asked him to look into Richard's activities. The embezzlement, yes, but also his personal life. What Mr. Stone discovered was extensive. Janet hesitated. "Are you sure you want to hear this now?" I thought about Richard's cold face at the funeral, Sarah's rehearsed words, the calculated cruelty of it all. "Tell me everything." "Richard has been having an affair for 4 years. Your parents had documentation surveillance photos, but that wasn't what worried them most." Janet pulled out an accident report. Vermont State Police, my parents' car. Mr. Stone had concerns about the accident itself. Your father maintained that vehicle meticulously. The brake failure that caused the crash. She looked at me carefully. "Mrs. Matthews, your parents didn't believe it was an accident. Neither does Mr. Stone." The words seemed to come from very far away. "What are you saying?" Janet's eyes held mine. "I'm saying your parents feared for their lives, and I'm saying Mr. Stone would like to speak with you, today if possible." I sat frozen, my mind reeling. $15 million. My husband was a thief. My daughter helped him, and my parents. They thought someone might harm them. They had reason to be concerned about people who stood to gain from their passing. Janet's careful phrasing made it clear what she meant. And given what's happened, given the timing of Richard's actions... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The wall behind Marcus Stone told the story before he said a word. I stood in the cramped office above a dry cleaner in Queens, staring at dozens of surveillance photographs, pinned to corkboard each one, a piece of my husband's double life. Richard and a dark-haired woman laughing over wine at an Italian restaurant. Richard entering a boutique hotel on the Upper West Side, the same woman at his side. Richard leaving an apartment building. I'd never seen his hand on the small of her back. Each image felt like a tiny knife, precise and cold. "Mrs. Matthews, I'm Marcus Stone," the man behind me said quietly. He was in his mid-40s with the kind of lean, watchful face that came from years of law enforcement. "Your parents hired me 3 months before the accident. I was FBI for 20 years before I went private. They asked me to look into your husband's finances. What I found went much further than money." He gestured toward a chair, but I couldn't move. My eyes were locked on one photograph, Richard and the woman kissing in what looked like her apartment afternoon light streaming through gauzy curtains. "Her name is Jessica Torres." Marcus continued pulling a folder from his desk. "She's 35, works in pharmaceutical sales. Your husband has been involved with her for 4 years. These photos were taken over the past 8 weeks, hotels and midtown dinners in Brooklyn, her apartment in Chelsea. He's been using embezzled company funds to pay for everything. Hotel rooms, jewelry, vacations to the Hamptons. We tracked over $300,000 in the past 18 months alone. 4 years. I sank into the chair, my legs suddenly unsteady. 4 years of lies hidden behind late meetings and business trips. 4 years while I ran the company my parents built, never suspecting. "Your daughter knows," Marcus said gently, laying another photograph on the desk. Sarah and Jessica sitting together at a Starbucks, their heads close in conversation. The timestamp read 6 weeks ago. Sarah met with Jessica multiple times. "She's been helping your husband cover his tracks, deleting messages, providing alibis. When you ask questions, even feeding him inside information about company audits." My chest tightened. The betrayal doubled, then tripled. Not just my husband, but my daughter, the child I'd raised, working together to deceive me. "Your parents suspected something wasn't right." Marcus went on, opening another file. "That's why they called me. They didn't just want to know about the missing money. They wanted to understand why Richard suddenly seemed so interested in their estate plans, why he kept asking when the trust would mature what would happen if they passed." He spread a timeline across the desk, handwritten notes marking key dates. Richard's affair began 4 years ago. The embezzlement started shortly after. Sarah discovered the affair 18 months ago and instead of telling me, chose to join the conspiracy. My parents hired Marcus 3 months before their car went off that mountain road. "I need to show you something else," Marcus said, his tone shifting. He pulled out a manila envelope and removed a police report and a stack of 8x10 photographs. "This is the accident report from Vermont. Your parents were driving back from a weekend at their cabin. The brake line failed completely on a steep descent. They went through a guardrail at 60 miles an hour. I stared at the photos, the twisted metal, the guardrail torn apart, the mountainside where the car had rolled. Your father was meticulous about car maintenance," Marcus said quietly. "Oil changes every 3,000 miles, inspections every 6 months, brake fluid checked religiously. I pulled the service records. The car had been serviced 1 week before the accident. Everything was in perfect working order." He laid one final photograph on the desk, a close-up of the brake line severed cleanly. "Brake lines don't fail on well-maintained vehicles," Marcus said, meeting my eyes. "Not unless someone wants them to. And with your parents gone, you and Richard stood to inherit $40 million in combined assets and company equity." The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the desk, my pulse roaring in my ears. "You're saying Richard—" "I'm saying the timing is suspicious," Marcus interrupted carefully. "Richard was deep in debt from his affair. He'd stolen $2 million and knew an audit was coming. Your parents were about to change their will to cut him out entirely. Then suddenly, they're gone, and he's positioning himself to take everything. He leaned back, his expression grave. Mrs. Matthews, I don't believe your parents' accident was an accident at all. The moment I stepped into Wheeler and Company's lobby, I knew something was wrong. The receptionist glanced up, then quickly looked away. Two junior designers hurried past without their usual greetings, whispering to each other. The sleek glass and steel office my parents had built in the heart of Manhattan suddenly felt hostile, like walking into enemy territory. Patricia Winters intercepted me before I reached the elevator. My assistant of 15 years, loyal, sharp, unshakable, grabbed my elbow and steered me toward an empty conference room. Her face was pale. "What's going on?" I demanded. "Sarah was here yesterday." Patricia said, her voice low and urgent. "She called an emergency board meeting. Mrs. Matthews, she told everyone you're suffering from cognitive decline. She said the grief over your parents has made you unstable, that you're making irrational decisions and shouldn't be running the company anymore." The floor seemed to drop beneath me. "She what?" "She's in the executive boardroom right now," Patricia continued. "She scheduled another meeting this morning and announced herself as acting CEO. Half the board doesn't know what to believe. She sounded so convincing, crying, saying she's worried about you, that she only wants to protect the company her grandparents built." Rage flooded through me, white hot and clarifying. This was my company. My name was on the paperwork. My sweat had built this firm into a $25 million enterprise, and my own daughter thought she could take it from me with lies. I didn't wait for Patricia's warning. I marched straight to the executive boardroom and threw the door open. Sarah stood at the head of the conference table mid-presentation, a sympathetic expression pasted on her face. 8 board members sat around the polished walnut table looking uncomfortable. The moment I entered, Sarah's eyes widened in false concern. "Mom," she said softly, stepping toward me with her hands outstretched. "You shouldn't be here. You need rest. This stress isn't good for you." "Don't you dare," I cut her off, my voice like steel. "This is my company. I am perfectly capable of running it." Sarah turned to the board, her tone shifting to something sad and patronizing. "You see, she's paranoid. 57 years old, just lost both parents in a tragic accident, and she's clearly not stable. We need to think about what's best for Wheeler and Company. We can't let her make decisions when she's in this state." Several board members shifted uncomfortably. One, Gerald, my father's oldest business partner, started to speak, but I silenced him with a look. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder Janet Rivera had given me. I slapped the ownership documents onto the table one after another. Trust agreements, stock certificates, board resolutions signed by my parents before they passed, naming me sole owner and CEO. "This company belongs to me," I said coldly, staring directly at Sarah. "Not to you, not to Richard. These documents are ironclad. My parents made sure of that." Gerald picked up one of the certificates, his face reddening. "Sarah, you told us your mother was incapacitated. This shows she manipulated all of you." I interrupted, my voice deadly calm. "Just like she's been manipulating me. And it ends now." I turned to face my daughter. "You're removed from the board effective immediately. Security will escort you out." For a split second, Sarah's mask slipped. The fake concern vanished, replaced by pure, undiluted rage. Her eyes went cold, not the eyes of my daughter, but something harder, calculating. "You'll regret this," she hissed, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "I know all your secrets, Mother, every single one." Then louder for the entire room, "This is just the beginning." The boardroom fell silent. I stared at the young woman who wore my daughter's face, trying to understand what secrets she thought she had, what weapons she believed she held. But what chilled me most wasn't the threat. It was the way she looked at me like a stranger studying an obstacle, not a daughter looking at her mother. Marcus's voice on the phone was tight with tension. "I found the mechanic. You need to hear this recording, but once you do, there's no going back." I was standing in my apartment, staring out at the Manhattan skyline, still shaken from the confrontation with Sarah 3 days earlier. My hands gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "Play it," I whispered. Marcus had tracked down the garage in Queens that had serviced my parents' car, a small family-run shop tucked beneath an overpass. The owner, Jose Martinez, was 40 years old, undocumented, and absolutely terrified when Marcus showed up asking questions. It had taken 2 days and a promise of protection to convince him to talk. The recording crackled to life. Jose's voice came through, first heavily accented, shaking with fear. "A man came to me 3 days before the trip. He paid cash, $25,000. I sank onto the couch, my legs suddenly weak. He said he needed a brake job," Jose continued, "but not a normal one. He wanted me to file down the brake line, not cut it, file it, so it would look like natural wear." Marcus's voice came through calm and professional. "Can you describe the man?" "White guy, maybe 60 years old, tall, expensive suit. He had this cold smile, like he was ordering coffee, not asking me to—" Jose's voice broke. "He showed me a picture of the car, told me exactly when they'd be driving it, said it had to fail on a mountain road." The description matched Richard perfectly. Every detail, his height, his age, the tailored suits he wore to impress clients, that chilling detachment I'd seen glimpses of over the years, but never fully understood. "Why did you agree?" Marcus asked. There was a long pause. Then Jose spoke again, his voice thick with guilt and shame. "My daughter needed surgery. Brain tumor. The hospital wanted $50,000 up front, and we had nothing. This man knew that. He found me because I was desperate." I pressed my hand over my mouth, fighting the wave of nausea rising in my throat. "I knew they would pass away," Jose whispered. When he described the route, steep grades, sharp turns, I knew the brake line would fail exactly when he wanted it to, when they needed it most. Marcus's voice, "Did you keep any evidence?" "I took pictures of the cash, the dates. He signed a fake work order, used a false name, but I kept it. I knew this was wrong. I thought maybe if something happened, I'd need proof I didn't do it alone." The recording clicked off. Silence filled my apartment, heavy and suffocating, pressing down on my chest until I could barely breathe. "I trace the money," Marcus said, back in real time. "Richard withdrew $50,000 from a hidden account 2 weeks before your parents' trip. The bank records show a $25,000 cash withdrawal on the exact date Jose described." "50,000, I repeated numbly. "But Jose only got 25. "Exactly," Marcus said grimly. "That's what we need to figure out. Where did the other 25,000 go? Who else was involved?" My mind spun. Another person, another payment, another conspirator in this nightmare that kept getting worse. "Jose's willing to testify," Marcus continued. "He kept the photos, the work order, everything. Combined with the forensic evidence from the accident site and Richard's bank records, we have enough to prove this wasn't an accident. Elizabeth, your parents were taken from you, deliberately, for the inheritance, for $40 million. My hands trembled as I set the phone down on speaker. The room seemed to tilt around me. I could barely form the words, barely force them past the tightness in my throat. "Does Sarah know?" I whispered. "Was she part of this?" The silence on Marcus's end stretched out heavy with unspoken truth. Then quietly he said something that made my blood run cold. "Let me show you something else. It's worse than you think." The process server looked apologetic as he handed me the legal papers in the hotel lobby. "Emergency petition for conservatorship, ma'am. My daughter was trying to have me declared mentally incompetent." I stood frozen in the middle of the Holiday Inn lobby, staring at the thick stack of documents. The petition was filed in New York County Court, Sarah's name, stamped across the top as petitioner. My hands shook as I read the allegations. Respondent Elizabeth Wheeler Matthews is suffering from severe mental incapacity due to grief and age-related cognitive decline. Age-related. I was 57 years old. I called Janet Rivera immediately. Within an hour, we were in her office, the conservatorship petition spread across her desk like evidence of a crime. Sarah hired a psychiatrist named Kevin Morrison. Janet said, her voice tight. He filed an evaluation claiming you have severe depression-impaired judgment and pose a danger to yourself. None of it's true, but Morrison has a reputation for writing whatever report his clients pay for. How is that legal? I demanded. It's not. Janet replied grimly. But if the judge accepts his evaluation at face value, Sarah could gain control over everything: your medical decisions, your finances, where you live. She could lock you in a facility and drain the company accounts before you ever saw daylight again. The room tilted. This wasn't just about reputation or control anymore. Sarah was trying to imprison me legally. We have 2 weeks until the hearing, Janet continued. I'm getting you evaluated by Dr. Amanda Foster. She's one of the most respected psychiatrists in Manhattan. Her testimony will destroy Morrison's lies. Dr. Foster's evaluation took 3 hours. Cognitive tests, memory assessments, detailed questions about my emotional state. At the end, she looked at me seriously and said, Mrs. Matthews, you are cognitively sharp, processing trauma in a completely normal way and show 0 signs of incapacity. Whoever wrote that other report should lose their license. Meanwhile, Janet and I dug into Sarah's motives. It didn't take long to find the smoking gun. Last year, Sarah had withdrawn $50,000 from my grandmother's trust fund money that was meant for family medical expenses. She'd forged my mother's signature and pocketed the cash. This, Janet said, holding up the bank records, is our ace. When Sarah takes the stand claiming she's worried about you, we show the judge she's a thief. The courtroom was cold and institutional, all oak paneling and fluorescent lights. Judge Patricia Patterson presided, a stern woman in her early 60s with sharp eyes that miss nothing. Sarah took the stand first, wearing a demure navy dress, her voice trembling with fake emotion. Your Honor, I'm terrified for my mother. She's been forgetting things, making bizarre financial decisions, talking about people following her. Since my grandparents passed, she's just deteriorated. It was a masterclass in manipulation. Even I almost believed her. Dr. Morrison testified next, describing observations he'd never made, conversations we'd never had. Mrs. Matthews exhibits paranoid delusions, severe depressive episodes, and lacks the capacity to manage her own affairs. Then it was my turn. I testified calmly about running Wheeler and Company, the company's financials, the staff I managed, the decisions I made every day. I answered the judge's questions clearly and confidently. Janet introduced Dr. Foster's evaluation, which systematically dismantled every claim Morrison had made. But our final move was the knockout punch. Janet submitted the bank records showing Sarah's $50,000 theft from my grandmother's trust. The documents were projected onto a screen for the entire courtroom to see: forged signatures, falsified withdrawal forms, the money trail leading straight to Sarah's personal account. Judge Patterson turned to Sarah, her expression ice cold. Ms. Matthews, did you embezzle $50,000 from your grandmother's medical trust? Sarah's mask slipped. Her face flushed red, her voice rising. That was a loan. She's gone now, so it doesn't even matter. The courtroom went silent. Even her own lawyer looked horrified. Petition denied, Judge Patterson said flatly. This isn't filial concern, Ms. Matthews. This is financial exploitation. If I see another filing like this, I'll refer you for criminal prosecution. Outside the courthouse, Sarah grabbed my arm, her nails digging in hard enough to bruise. You humiliated me in there, she hissed, her face inches from mine. Big mistake, Mother, huge mistake. The violence in her grip told me everything I needed to know. Her next move would be far worse. If you're still here, comment 6 so I know you're standing with me. And tell me, if it were your own child behind something like this, would you confront them immediately? Or gather proof and wait for the perfect moment? What happens next changes everything. And a quick note, some upcoming elements are dramatized for storytelling depth. If this type of content isn't for you, feel free to stop here. My phone rang at 3 a.m. Marcus's voice was rough, urgent. I found it. Everything. The evidence we need, but brace yourself. This is going to hurt. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. What did you find? I've been surveilling Sarah since the courthouse, Marcus said. Yesterday, she went to a storage unit in Queens. I got a warrant, searched the locker. Elizabeth, she kept a burner phone, a Samsung unregistered, hidden in a box marked old electronics. Why would she keep a burner phone? Insurance against Richard, Marcus said grimly. If he ever turned on her, she'd have proof of everything they did together. Except now it's proof against both of them. I extracted all the data. "Can you meet me at my office? You need to see this in person." 20 minutes later, I sat across from Marcus in his Queens office, a laptop between us. The burner phone's contents were displayed on the screen: text, voice memos, photos, search history. My hands were shaking. "Let's start with the text messages," Marcus said quietly. He scrolled to a thread dated 4 months before my parents' accident. Richard and Sarah planning everything in cold clinical detail. "Richard, the will changed. Everything's going into the trust. We need to move fast." Sarah, "the mechanic. He's reliable." Richard, "untraceable. Brake failure, Mountain Road, no witnesses. Clean." Sarah, "What if Mom's in the car too?" I felt my stomach drop. Richard, "faster inheritance. Either way, we win." The words blurred. My own daughter casually discussing whether I should live or pass away alongside my parents, as if I were a variable in a business calculation. "There's more," Marcus said gently. He clicked on a voice memo labeled practice_funeral. Sarah's voice filled the room, trembling with fake emotion. "Oh, Mom, they're gone. They're really gone." A pause. Then her real voice cold, amused. "Too much. Try it more natural." She practiced crying. She rehearsed her grief like lines in a play, perfecting the performance she'd deliver at the cemetery while handing me those divorce papers. I pressed my hand over my mouth, fighting nausea. Marcus played another recording. This one was labeled phase_4_planning. Sarah's voice calm and businesslike. "Once we control everything, Mom becomes unnecessary. An accident 6 months out. A stress-induced heart incident. Something that doesn't raise suspicion after all the trauma she's been through." The room spun. Phase 4. There were phases. A timeline for ending my life scheduled like a project milestone. "And these," Marcus said quietly, opening a photo folder. Over 200 images filled the screen. Me walking to the office. Me having coffee at a cafe. Me doing yoga in my apartment. Me asleep in my own bed, taken from an angle that could only mean one thing. Sarah had been inside my bedroom, standing over me while I slept. "She broke into your apartment multiple times," Marcus said. "These photos are surveillance. She was tracking your routines, your vulnerabilities, planning when to strike." I stared at one particular image, me lying in bed, eyes closed, completely unaware. My daughter had stood there in the darkness, watching me breathe, deciding when and how to take my life. Her search history. Marcus added, pulling up another file. "How to cause a heart attack. Untraceable substances. Detecting brake tampering. Symptoms of natural decline. Average time for investigations to close." Every search was a step in a murder manual. Every query was another nail in a coffin she'd been building for me. Marcus closed the laptop. Sarah kept this phone as leverage against Richard. She knew if things went south, she'd need proof of his involvement. But it proves her guilt just as much. Text messages, voice memos, photos, search history. This is premeditated conspiracy to commit harm. We can take this to the FBI right now. I looked at the black screen of the laptop, seeing my own reflection staring back. Somewhere beneath that surface was an image of me sleeping, taken by the daughter I'd raised. "What do you want to do?" Marcus asked quietly. I lifted my eyes, my tears already gone, replaced by something harder. "I want to confront them," I said. "Both of them. With an FBI wire. I need to hear them admit it. I need them to say it out loud." My mechanic called that morning, his voice shaking. "Mrs. Matthews, you need to get here now. Someone tampered with your car, the exact same way." I was at the garage within 20 minutes, Marcus right behind me. My sedan was up on the lift, the undercarriage exposed. The mechanic, a 60-year-old man named Frank who'd serviced my cars for 15 years, pointed to the brake line with a trembling hand. "File down," he said quietly. "Same technique as what happened to your parents' vehicle. Another few days, maybe a week, and it would have failed completely. You would have had no brakes at all." Marcus crouched beneath the car, examining the damage with a forensic eye. "Sarah's escalating. She knows we're investigating. This is desperation." That afternoon, we met with the FBI. 2 agents, a woman named Torres and a man named Sullivan, agreed to the wire plan, but with conditions. You wear the device at all times. We monitor from a surveillance van. If things get physical, we intervene immediately. I agreed. Security was tightened around my apartment and office, but I deliberately left gaps in my routine. I needed Sarah to make a move, and I needed it on record. That evening, day 39, since my parents' funeral, I stayed late at Wheeler and Company. The office was nearly empty, just a few cleaning staff and one junior designer working a deadline. I made sure Sarah would know I was alone. At 9:15, the elevator doors opened. Sarah stepped out, her face pale, her eyes wild. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, her voice tight. "Upstairs, privately." I felt the wire taped to my ribs, the tiny microphone hidden beneath my blouse. Marcus was listening from the van parked 2 blocks away. "Of course," I said calmly. We took the stairs to the 3rd floor, a mostly unused storage level with a landing near the emergency exit. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Sarah's hands were shaking. "Why won't you just give up?" She exploded, spinning to face me. "Why can't you just let this go?" I met her eyes. "Because you and Richard took my parents from me." Sarah froze. "What?" "The brake line," I said quietly. "Jose Martinez, the mechanic, $25,000 in cash. I know everything." Her face went white. "You can't prove anything. I have your burner phone, Sarah." I took a step forward. "Every text message, every plan, the photos you took of me sleeping in my own bed." Panic flashed across her face. "That's impossible. Where did you—" "The storage unit in Queens," I said. "You kept it as insurance against Richard, but it's evidence against both of you." She realized in that instant that she'd been trapped. The rage that crossed her face was pure primal. "Then you know too much," she screamed. "You're next." She lunged. I saw it coming, tried to sidestep, but her hands slammed into my shoulders with shocking force. I stumbled backward, grasping for the stairwell railing, but my fingers slipped. I fell 3 hard steps, my body slamming into the landing. Pain exploded in my ribs, white-hot and blinding. Above me, Sarah stood frozen, staring at her own hands as if they belonged to someone else. Then the alarms went off. Security had been monitoring the 3rd floor. 2 guards burst through the stairwell door shouting. One grabbed Sarah as she tried to run. The other knelt beside me, his radio crackling with calls for paramedics and police. Sarah fought screaming obscenities, but the guard wrestled her toward the elevator. I watched through a haze of pain as they disappeared from view. The paramedics arrived as police were handcuffing Sarah in the lobby. I heard her screaming even from the 3rd floor. "Dad will fix this. He'll make this all go away." But I knew better. As they loaded me onto a stretcher, my bruised ribs screaming with every breath, I looked at Marcus, standing in the doorway. The security cameras had captured everything. The FBI wire had recorded every word. "Now we get Richard," I said through gritted teeth. "End this now." I walked into the conference room with my ribs taped and the FBI wire pressed against my chest. Richard and Sarah thought this was a settlement meeting. The federal agents in the adjacent room knew better. It had taken 3 days to set up the trap. I'd been discharged from the hospital with strict orders to rest, but rest would have to wait. Agent Rodriguez and his team had arranged everything: a neutral law office in Midtown, a reconciliation discussion brokered through attorneys, and a hidden recording system that would capture every word. Richard arrived first, looking haggard but defiant in an expensive suit. Sarah came 10 minutes later, her eyes red-rimmed, her face pale. They thought I was broken. They thought I was ready to negotiate my own surrender. I wasn't. I placed the burner phone in the center of the conference table. Richard stared at it, confusion flickering across his face. "What is that?" "I know everything," I said quietly. "The brake lines. Both times my parents and my car." I pressed a button on the laptop in front of me. The phone's text messages projected onto the wall behind me, white text on a dark screen impossible to ignore. I read one aloud: "Brake failure, Mountain Road, no witnesses. Clean." Sarah's face drained of color. "Where did you get that?" "Your storage unit," I said. "You thought it was hidden. You kept it as insurance against Richard, but it's evidence against both of you." The silence was suffocating. I watched realization dawn on their faces. They were completely trapped. "Did you take my parents from me?" I asked, my voice breaking slightly. "Tell me the truth." Richard tried to recover. "You're misunderstanding. I have Jose Martinez's confession." I interrupted. "The financial trail. $50,000, $25,000 to each of you." Sarah exploded. "They were going to give it all to charity," she screamed, slamming her hands on the table. "After everything I did for them, after I built that company with my own hands." "Sarah, shut up," Richard hissed. But she couldn't stop. The dam had broken. "And you," she shouted, turning on me, "you were next. Phase 4. Grieving widow has a stress-induced heart incident, falls down the stairs. No one suspects a thing." My voice came out as a whisper. "I'm your mother." Sarah laughed, a high, wild sound. "You're an obstacle, you and your parents, standing in the way of what I deserve. That company should have been mine. That money should have been mine." Said Dewey Gamings. Richard lunged across the table, grabbing her arm. "Stop talking!" "Why?" Sarah shrieked, ripping free. "It was your idea. You said no one would suspect anything. You're the one who said we could make it look natural." Richard shot back, desperation creeping into his voice. "You said your mother was old enough that people wouldn't question it. You paid the mechanic. You picked him out." They turned on each other like animals, each confession tumbling out in a desperate attempt to shift blame. Phase 4. The brake tampering. The plan to stage my passing as grief-related. Every horrifying detail spilled into the open, recorded by the wire taped to my chest. The door burst open. Agent Rodriguez and 4 other agents stormed in, weapons drawn. "Richard Matthews, Sarah Matthews, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit harm and 2 counts of first-degree charges related to the loss of Eleanor and Jonathan Wheeler." Sarah screamed as they handcuffed her, thrashing against the agents. "I hate you. I always hated you. I'm glad I did it. Glad they're gone." I stood slowly, every breath sending pain through my ribs. I looked at my daughter, this stranger wearing her face, and felt nothing but a vast, aching emptiness. "Goodbye, Sarah," I whispered, and I walked away. The headlines screamed, "Mother exposes daughter's plot to end her life." I sat alone in my parents' Westchester estate, holding their photograph in my hands. But I wasn't alone anymore. I had reclaimed my strength. The media storm was relentless. Every news outlet in the country wanted my story, the daughter and husband who conspired to take everything, the FBI wire that caught their confession, the burner phone that documented their every plan. Reporters camped outside the Holiday Inn until I finally moved into my parents' home, a sprawling colonial in a gated community where security could keep them at bay. I inherited everything: the house, the investment portfolio, the company shares my parents had carefully protected in trust. The $40 million Richard and Sarah had schemed and taken lives for now sat in accounts bearing my name alone. But money couldn't heal what had been broken. I began therapy with Dr. Rebecca Wilson, a calm, gray-haired woman in her 50s who specialized in trauma and family betrayal. In our first session, I could barely form the words. "My daughter tried to end my life," I whispered. "How do I face that?" Dr. Wilson leaned forward, her eyes gentle but unflinching. "You grieve the daughter you thought you had, Mrs. Matthews, because that person never existed. The woman who planned your harm, that's who Sarah always was. You just didn't see it." The words were brutal, but they were true. 3 weeks after the arrest, I returned to Wheeler and Company as CEO. The office felt different, quieter, sadder. But the moment I walked through the glass doors, my employees stood and applauded. Several had tears in their eyes. "We're so sorry," one of the junior designers said. "We should never have believed Sarah." Patricia pulled me into her office, her face lined with guilt. I knew something was off about her. I should have said something sooner. "You were loyal," I told her. "That's not a crime. You're my right hand now, Patricia. Let's rebuild this together." And we did. Slowly, client by client, contract by contract, Wheeler and Company regained its footing. Word spread that I was back, that the company was stable, that the chaos was over. Respect returned. Revenue followed. Meanwhile, the legal machinery ground forward. Richard's attorney reached out to Janet with a plea offer. He'd plead guilty to embezzlement in exchange for dropping the charges related to my parents. I refused. "No deal. They took my parents from me. I want a trial." Sarah's lawyer tried a different tactic, claiming she'd been manipulated by Richard, that she had diminished capacity due to emotional distress. I shut that down too. She planned my harm in excruciating detail. She knew exactly what she was doing. Both of them filed motions blaming each other, each deposition contradicting the last. Their united front had crumbled the moment the handcuffs went on. Sarah sent letters from jail-thick envelopes postmarked from the Women's Detention Center in Brooklyn. I never opened them. Week after week, they piled up on my desk, each one stamped return to sender in Patricia's neat handwriting. Prosecutor Catherine Walsh, a no-nonsense woman in her mid-40s with a reputation for never losing a case, met with me regularly. With the burner phone, the FBI wire, and Jose Martinez's testimony, they're finished, she said bluntly. This is one of the strongest cases I've ever prosecuted. Every Sunday I visited my parents' graves. I brought fresh flowers, sat on the bench beneath the oak tree, and talked to them as if they could hear. I got them Mom and Dad, I whispered one cold morning in late March. Justice is coming, I promise. By April, 4 months after the funeral that had started, the trial date was set. Catherine called me on a bright spring morning, her voice brisk and confident. Trial starts Monday. It's fast for a case of this magnitude, but the evidence is overwhelming. The defense has almost nothing. Are you ready? I stood in my parents' living room looking at their photograph on the mantel, my mother's warm smile, my father's steady gaze. I thought about everything they'd built, everything they'd sacrificed, everything Richard and Sarah had tried to steal. I've never been more ready for anything in my life, I said. The courtroom was packed. Cameras lined the courthouse steps, reporters jostling for position. I walked through the heavy oak doors and saw them at the defense table, Richard in an expensive charcoal suit, Sarah in a modest navy dress, both with carefully arranged expressions of sorrow. Playing innocent. The jury would see the truth. Judge Harrison, a stern man in his late 60s, called the court to order. The jury, 12 ordinary people pulled from their lives to decide justice, sat in 2 rows, their faces already curious, already judging. Prosecutor Catherine Walsh stood for her opening statement. Her voice was sharp, clinical, devastating. This is a case about greed, she said, about a husband and daughter who planned and executed the taking of 2 innocent lives for $40 million. The evidence will show a meticulous conspiracy, text messages, voice recordings, financial trails, and confessions, recorded on FBI wire. By the end of this trial, you will have no doubt of their guilt. The defense attorney, a nervous man named Brennan, tried to counter. This is a tragic misunderstanding born of grief and manipulation. My client Sarah was influenced by her stepfather, but his words sounded hollow even as he spoke them. The prosecution called Jose Martinez first. The mechanic took the stand, visibly shaking. He was no criminal mastermind, just a desperate father who'd made a terrible choice. Catherine walked him through it step by step. Mr. Martinez, did someone pay you to tamper with a vehicle? Yes, Jose whispered. How much? $25,000 cash. Catherine introduced a sample brake line, and Jose demonstrated how he'd filed it down, not cut, but slowly weakened so it would fail under pressure. The jury watched horrified as he explained exactly how it would cause a catastrophic failure on a steep mountain road. Did you know this would take lives? Jose's voice broke. Yes, I knew. Catherine showed him a photograph. Is this the man who paid you? Jose pointed directly at Richard. That's him. The jury's eyes shifted to Richard, who sat stone-faced, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear. Marcus Stone testified next, laying out the investigation with the precision of someone who'd spent 20 years in the FBI. He walked the jury through the surveillance, the financial records, showing Richard's $50,000 withdrawal, the discovery of the storage unit, and the burner phone hidden inside. This wasn't impulsive, Marcus said calmly. This was planned over months, every step calculated. An FBI digital forensics expert followed, authenticating the burner phone's contents, chain of custody, data extraction, every text, every photo, every voice memo preserved and verified. Then Catherine played the audio. The courtroom fell silent as Sarah's voice filled the room, practicing her grief. Oh, Mom, they're gone. They're really gone. A pause, then her real voice amused. Too much. Try it more natural. Several jurors visibly recoiled. One woman pressed her hand over her mouth. Catherine read the text messages aloud, Richard and Sarah planning the brake tampering, discussing no witnesses, coldly calculating what would happen if I'd been in the car too. Then came the recording labeled Phase 4. Sarah's voice, businesslike and chilling. Once we control everything, Mom becomes expendable. An accident 6 months out. A stress-induced heart incident. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The photos came next, over 200 images of me, including several taken while I slept, shot from inside my own bedroom. The jury looked at Sarah with open revulsion. Finally, I took the stand. Catherine's voice was gentle. Mrs. Matthews, please tell the jury about your relationship with the defendants. I looked at the jury, then at Richard and Sarah. Richard was my husband of 32 years. Sarah is my daughter. I love them more than life itself. I described the betrayal at my parents' funeral, the 3 escalating attacks, the moment Sarah shoved me toward the stairwell. During cross-examination, the defense attorney tried weakly, "Isn't it possible you misunderstood?" "I didn't misunderstand her hands when they pushed me toward the stairs," I said evenly. Then Catherine played the wire recording from the conference room, the full confession, Richard and Sarah, turning on each other, every damning word captured. Sarah's voice screaming, "I'm glad I did it, glad they're gone." The courtroom went dead silent. The defense rested without calling a single witness. They had no rebuttal to the recorded confessions, the burner phone filled with plans, the mother's testimony. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Tomorrow we would have our verdict. 3 hours. The jury had deliberated for only 3 hours. When they filed back into the courtroom, not a single juror looked toward the defense table. I already knew. The courtroom was packed. Judge Harrison called for order, his gavel sharp against the wood. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman, a middle-aged woman in a blue cardigan, stood. "We have, Your Honor." The judge reviewed the forms silently, then returned them to the clerk. "The defendant will rise." Sarah stood on shaking legs, her face already streaked with tears. Richard stood beside her, expressionless. The clerk began to read. "In the matter of the People versus Sarah Matthews, Count 1, the taking of the life of Eleanor Wheeler, we find the defendant guilty." Sarah gasped. "Count 2, the taking of the life of Jonathan Wheeler, guilty. Count 3, conspiracy to commit harm, guilty. Count 4, attempted harm against Elizabeth Wheeler, Matthews, guilty." Sarah collapsed into her chair, sobbing hysterically. The clerk turned to Richard. "In the matter of the People versus Richard Matthews, 4 counts, 4 guilty verdicts." Richard didn't move, didn't flinch. The courtroom erupted. Judge Harrison slammed his gavel. "Order!" "Mrs. Matthews," the judge said quietly, "you have the right to address the court." I walked to the podium and looked directly at Sarah and Richard. "Your Honor." I began, my voice steady. "They didn't just take my parents from me. They took my family. They took my ability to trust." I turned to face Sarah. She looked up, mascara running down her cheeks. "I carried you for 9 months," I said quietly. "I held you when you were born. I loved you unconditionally, and you ended your grandparents' lives for money, not out of desperation, out of greed." My voice cracked, but I continued. "I don't know if I'll ever heal from this, but I know one thing: they can never harm anyone else." I sat down. Patricia took my hand. Judge Harrison looked at Richard and Sarah, his expression grave. In 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen evil as calculated as this. 2 elderly, innocent people were taken from this world because of greed. Premeditated, meticulously planned greed. He straightened. "I have reviewed the evidence. What strikes me most is the complete absence of remorse. No apology, no recognition of harm, only anger at being caught." His voice rang through the courtroom. "This court finds no mitigating factors. Richard Matthews, you are hereby sentenced to 2 consecutive terms of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Sarah Matthews, you are hereby sentenced to 2 consecutive terms of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." Sarah's scream tore through the courtroom. "No, I'm only 33. You can't lock me up forever." She lunged toward me. Bailiffs grabbed her. "Mom, please, I'm your daughter. Save me." I didn't turn around. I didn't even look back. "Look at me," Sarah shrieked. "You can't do this to me." The bailiffs dragged her toward the side door, her screams echoing. Richard was led out in silence. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. One shoved a microphone in my face. "Mrs. Matthews, will you ever forgive her?" I looked back at the courthouse steps, the place where justice had finally been served. "Some questions," I said quietly, "don't have easy answers." And I walked away, leaving that old life behind. It was over. 6 months after the trial, I sat at my father's old desk at Wheeler & Company. The logo had been redesigned, the office renovated with clean lines and natural light. But it wasn't the building that had changed. It was me. I was 58 now, a different woman from the one who'd stood at her parents' graves and been handed divorce papers. That version of me had been shattered, broken, unsure if she could survive. This version had rebuilt herself from the ground up. Wheeler & Company was thriving. Revenue was up 40%. We'd expanded into 2 new cities, Boston and Philadelphia, and hired 15 new designers. 3 major contracts had come through in the past month alone, including one with a national hotel chain. The company my parents built, the one Richard and Sarah tried to steal, was stronger than ever. I'd also launched the Eleanor and Jonathan Wheeler Foundation. Its mission was simple: prevent elder abuse and advocate for victims of financial exploitation. In 6 months, we'd helped over 200 families navigate legal protections, guardianship disputes, and fraud recovery. I spoke at conferences, sharing my story to audiences who looked at me with a mix of sympathy and awe. At 57, they told me I was finished. I said at one conference in Chicago that I was too old, too grief-stricken, too broken to lead. They were wrong. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. Therapy with Dr. Rebecca Wilson continued every Tuesday afternoon. In our most recent session, she'd asked the question I'd been avoiding. "How do you feel about Sarah now?" I stared at the window, watching rain streak the glass. "Like I'm mourning a death," I said finally. The daughter I loved never existed. I was in love with an idea, a person I'd invented in my head. The real Sarah, the one who could plan her grandparents' harm with such cold precision I never knew her at all. Dr. Wilson nodded. "You're allowed to feel grief and anger at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive." "I know," I whispered. But knowing and accepting were different things. Every Sunday I visited my parents' graves. I brought fresh flowers, my mother's favorite peonies when they were in season, and updated them on the company, the foundation, the life I was building in their honor. "We're doing good things in your names," I told them one crisp October morning. "I hope you're proud." The letters had started arriving 2 months after the trial. The first one came from Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women, Sarah's handwriting unmistakable on the envelope. I'd stared at it for an hour, sitting at my kitchen table, unable to tear it open. Eventually, I'd placed it in a drawer in my parents' study, labeled simply, "From Sarah." More letters followed. 1 a week, sometimes 2. They piled up 23 in total, all unopened. Patricia had noticed the stack one afternoon when she'd brought files to my home office. "Are you going to read them?" she'd asked gently. "I don't know," I'd said. "Maybe, someday." But someday felt impossibly far away. Tonight, though, something shifted. The latest letter had arrived yesterday. I sat alone in my parents' study, a glass of wine in hand, the envelope resting on the desk. Their photographs watched me from the mantel, my mother's kind eyes, my father's steady presence. I picked up the envelope, my hands trembled as I tore it open. 4 pages handwritten in shaky script. "Dear Mom, I don't deserve your time or your forgiveness. I know that. But my therapist here says I need to write this anyway, not for you, but for myself, to face what I did. I've been in therapy 3 times a week since I arrived. They diagnosed me with narcissistic personality disorder and something called arrested emotional development. Basically, I'm emotionally stuck at age 12 when Dad came into my life and started telling me I was special, that I deserved everything. I killed my grandparents. I planned it. I knew what would happen. And when it was over, I felt nothing. Just relief that the money would finally be mine. Now 6 months in this place, I feel everything. The guilt is drowning me. I wake up screaming. I see Grandma's face. I hear the way you said, "I'm your mother," and how I called you an obstacle. I don't know if I'll ever be a person worthy of forgiveness, but I need you to know I'm sorry, Mom. Truly, truly sorry. I folded the letter carefully and set it down. Then I sat in the darkness, tears streaming down my face. Was she really sorry? Or just sorry she'd been caught? I'd driven to Bedford Hills Correctional Facility 3 times before and turned back. Today, 18 months after sentencing, I finally walked through that door. I'd received 73 letters. I'd read 42. Now I was ready to face her. The procedures were methodical: ID check, visitor badge, metal detector, security wand. A guard led me down a fluorescent-lit corridor to the visiting room. Glass partitions divided the space into narrow booths, black phones mounted on either side. I sat down, my hands trembling. The door on the other side opened. Sarah appeared. She looked different, thinner, almost gaunt. Gray streaks threaded through her hair at 33. Lines etched around her eyes that hadn't been there at the trial. Prison had aged her in ways time alone couldn't explain. We stared at each other through the glass. A long silence stretched between us. Finally, Sarah picked up the phone. I did the same. "You came," she whispered. "I didn't think you would." "I almost didn't," I said. "This is my 4th try." "Why now?" "To see if the daughter I once loved is still in there," I said quietly. "Or if she ever was." Sarah's face crumpled. "I don't know, Mom. I'm trying to figure that out in therapy. Your letters say you're sorry." I said, my voice steady. "Is it real, truly real? Or are you just sorry you're in prison?" Sarah was silent for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was raw. "I'm trying to figure that out, honestly. Some days I'm horrified. I think about Grandma and Grandpa and I can't breathe. The guilt crushes me." She paused. "Other days I'm numb. I feel nothing. And some days I'm ashamed to say this, I'm still angry at you." It was the first truly honest thing she'd said. "Why did you do it?" I asked. "The real reason." Sarah looked down at her hands. "I was empty. I thought money would fill it. Power. Proving I was better than you, smarter than you. But I'm still empty. Just now, I'm also a killer." The word hung between us. No euphemism, no softening. "Can a person change that much?" I asked. "Can a killer change?" "I don't know," Sarah said. "But I'm trying. I earned my degree here, psychology. I volunteer for the mental health program. I teach anger management to other inmates." She looked up, meeting my eyes. "If my story can stop even one woman from becoming what I am, maybe it'll mean something." I felt tears sting my eyes. "I still see traces of that little girl I used to know, and it hurts." Sarah's voice broke. "That little girl is gone, Mom. I killed her too." We sat in silence, the phones pressed to our ears, separated by glass and choices that couldn't be undone. "Will you come back?" Sarah asked quietly. "Not next week. Maybe not for years, but someday." I stood to leave my legs unsteady. "I'll think about it. That's all I can promise." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "That's more than I deserve. Thank you, Mom, for not giving up on me completely." I hung up the phone and walked out past the security checkpoints through the heavy doors into the parking lot, where sunlight felt almost painful after the fluorescent prison lights. As I sat in my car, hands on the steering wheel, I realized something. I'd left the door open. Just a crack. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but not total abandonment either. Was that weakness or the strongest thing I'd ever done? I didn't know. But as I drove away from Bedford Hills, watching the prison fade in my rearview mirror, I thought about Dr. Wilson's words from months ago. You're allowed to feel grief and anger at the same time. Maybe I was also allowed to feel compassion and doubt, hope and skepticism, love for who Sarah might have been and sorrow for who she became. Maybe that was enough. At 57, they said I was finished. I stood at the podium, 500 faces looking back. At 59, I'm just beginning. The applause rolled through the ballroom like thunder. I was the keynote speaker at a national conference on resilience 2 years after the trial that had made headlines. 2 years after my life had shattered and rebuilt itself into something unrecognizable. Wheeler & Company now operated in 3 cities, New York, Boston, and Chicago. Revenue had tripled. Last month, we'd been named one of the top design firms in America. The company my parents built, the one Richard and Sarah tried to steal, was thriving beyond anything they'd imagined. The Eleanor and Jonathan Wheeler Foundation had helped over 1,000 victims of elder abuse navigate legal protections and financial recovery. We'd launched scholarship programs in their names. Every person we helped felt like honoring their memory one more time. A year ago, I'd had a cancer scare, a false alarm, thank God, but it had required treatment and reminded me how fragile life could be. I was healthy now. I had new friends, a book club, a yoga group, volunteer work at a women's shelter. I was single by choice, focusing on myself for the first time in decades. I mentored young women entrepreneurs, sharing everything I'd learned about resilience and rebuilding. I was against all odds happy. Richard remained in prison unrepentant. He'd written one letter 6 months after sentencing. I'd burned it without reading it. He'd tried to appeal his conviction and been denied. Some people I'd learned simply can't be redeemed. They don't want to be. Sarah was different. She'd undergone 18 months of intensive therapy. She'd earned her bachelor's degree in psychology and was now pursuing a master's through a prison education program. She volunteered at the prison's mental health clinic, taught anger management and emotional regulation to other inmates. Over 2 years, she'd sent more than 100 letters. I'd read most of them now. I'd visited her 4 times total. Our conversations were raw, honest, painful. She was changing slowly, painstakingly, without guarantees. In her most recent letter, she'd written, "If my story can stop even one person from making my choices, maybe spending the rest of my life behind bars will have meaning." Maybe. People ask me if I've forgiven my daughter. I told the conference audience. There's no simple answer. Forgiveness isn't a light switch you flip. It's a journey. Maybe in 20 years, when she's spent half her life in prison, when she's truly become someone different, maybe then. Or maybe never. I don't know. I paused, scanning the faces. Some people were crying. What I do know is this: I survived. I thrived. I became stronger than I ever imagined possible. And that's enough. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. After the speech, I drove to the cemetery. I brought peonies, my mother's favorite, and placed them on their graves. I sat on the familiar bench beneath the oak tree, pulled out Sarah's latest letter from my purse, and read it again. Dear Mom, I've been thinking about seeds. My therapist says growth requires darkness. That transformation happens in buried places. I'm trying to believe that. I'm trying to become someone worthy of the life I took. I don't know if I'll ever get there, but I'm trying. Love, Sarah. I folded the letter carefully and looked at the gravestones. I'm trying my best, Mom and Dad, I whispered. That's all any of us can do. I touched their engraved names, Eleanor Rose Wheeler, Jonathan Thomas Wheeler, and walked back to my car, the letter still in my hand. As I drove away, the sunset painting the sky gold and crimson, I thought about the question everyone asked. Have you forgiven her? The answer wasn't simple. She was my daughter. She was a killer. She was changing. She was serving life without parole. All of those things were true at once. At 57, they'd tried to bury me, my husband, my daughter, the people I'd loved most. They thought grief and age would finish me. They didn't know I was a seed, and seeds, when buried, don't die. They grow. Looking back at my journey, I see a woman who almost let betrayal define her ending. At 57, when my husband and daughter ambushed me at my parents' funeral, I could have surrendered. I could have believed their lies that I was too old, too broken, too finished. Don't be like me in one way. Don't wait until crisis forces you to discover your strength. Don't let others, even family, convince you that age diminishes your worth. The lesson I learned: family drama stories like mine aren't rare. Grandma stories of elder abuse fill courtrooms every day. Family drama stories hide behind closed doors until someone finds the courage to speak. My parents' grandma stories, their wisdom, their warnings saved me because I finally listened. Here's my truth. Forgiveness is not weakness, but it's also not required. Some wounds take lifetimes. Some people change, others don't. God gave me strength when I had none left, and for that, I'm grateful. But He also gave me discernment to know the difference between redemption and manipulation. If you're facing your own family drama stories or watching grandma stories unfold in your family, trust your instincts. Document everything. Seek help. You are not too old, too tired, or too late to fight back. At 57, they tried to bury me. They didn't know I was a seed. Thank you for walking this journey with me to the very end. I'd love to hear your perspective. Drop a comment sharing what you would do if you found yourself in a situation like mine, caught between justice and family loyalty. Your thoughts mean everything. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing so you won't miss future stories that explore the complexity of family betrayal and resilience. A gentle note. While inspired by real social issues surrounding elder abuse and family betrayal, certain elements have been dramatized for storytelling purposes. If this content isn't your preference, feel free to explore other videos that better suit your interests.